I'm Ben Sawyer, and this is The Road to Now. Today, I'm happy to share with all of you part one of our live show from Washington, D.C. This was back on May 29th. You heard us talking about it a lot, and it was amazing. Our guests were Major Garrett of CBS News, Margaret Talev of Syracuse University and Axios, and Doug Heye. You know all three of those people, perhaps just because they're kind of everywhere in the media, but also you probably know them from being guests on this show before. It was such a fun conversation. The topic was murder and mayhem in Washington, D.C., in the capital city. Bob told an incredible story at the show. Really happy to share this with you. So we hope you enjoy it as much as we enjoyed doing it. Just want to say a special shout out, number one, to everyone who came to the show. It was great to meet a lot of folks there. It's always a delight whenever you get to see the people that you know exist, but have never met in person. Second of all, thank you to the Hamilton Live. The venue was great, and especially Matt Burton, who ran the tech, who did a fantastic job of getting us this audio and just making sure everything worked. Couldn't have been a better venue. Couldn't have been better people. As you know, when we're saying thanks on the show, we also say thanks to the patrons. Patreon.com/theroadtonow. Actually, if you want to see the full unedited conversation, it is there. The whole video of the show is there, actually. We posted it last week. If you like this and you want to hear more of it, then the whole thing's there. For the rest of you guys, this is part one. We closed out the show. I told a story about a insane congressman named Marian Zajanchek. We did it in the form of trivia, but we decided to split this into two different episodes. So that story will be on our feed on Wednesday as its own kind of separate standalone episode. We got into so much in this conversation that it was like, what do we leave? What do we take? And I just thought, why not make this two separate episodes? Also, spoiler alert for that next episode, we resurrected a drink that may not have been made in Washington, D.C. in something like 90 years. And Heidi Lang, if you're listening, our patron, we played trivia in that. And if those guys got 2 out of 3 of the trivia questions right, then guess what? You won some swag. But then again, maybe you already know that because you might have watched it on Patreon. Either way, thank you for supporting us. Guys, please rate and review us. Come support us on Patreon. And thank you for making this show possible. Again, we'll be back with a next episode in just a couple of days. Until then, take care.
So our first guest tonight, he is the guy we text when we have a question about politics. He's also a sommelier.
Yeah, he also did some things like he was the former comms director for the RNC and like...
He's the chief of staff there, Cantor.
Very accomplished political career, but other than that, we text him when we have questions about politics.
Please welcome to the stage, Mr. Doug Heye. Well, Doug, we wanted to have you here because you're kind of a part of the band.
Okay, I'll take that.
Meaning, we are a band, kind of what we do. We're a podcast, but we're like a band.
He was the first guest we ever recorded an episode with.
Guest.
Yes.
It's a kind way of saying I don't have much to do with my time, but I appreciate it.
He said yes,
Sure.
So thank you. Thank you.
Yes, there's two ways of saying something. One is you're really out of work, and the other one is you've been on our show a lot. It's kind of the same thing. But it's great to have you here, Doug. When Bob and I got together to talk about this show, just full disclosure, we got offered this show before the election. And we were like, that sounds great. And then we were like, well, everything started happening. And I go to Bob, I go, I don't think people are going to want to come out to a show to hear more about the seriousness of history and politics. So we came up with the theme, murder and mayhem in the capital city. And you were our first person that we thought of, Doug, because you're always a good anchor on the show.
Well, I appreciate that. I think in full disclosure, that's because some of my first experiences on Capitol Hill were with Gary Condit and his sex scandal, and there was a murder involved in that. And then 15 years later, I go to the RNC and I deal with the RNC lesbian-themed bondage club issue, if you remember that one, which I still try and forget. And then I go to Eric Cantor's office, and a member of Congress on one of his trips went skinny dipping in the Sea of Galilee, speaking of skinny dipping. So yeah, I got a whole lot of experience on that. And let me tell you, when a story like the lesbian-themed bondage club RNC spending comes out, now, some idiot staffer, I think I called them an idiot on the record, spent about $2,500 of money that they got reimbursed for in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, you would call this a nightclub. In Washington, D.C., you call it a lesbian-themed bondage club. Now, that story got picked up everywhere. It was about a week and a half of my life. And the hardest conversation I had with it wasn't with the RNC chairman, wasn't with any particular reporter. It was when my aunt called from Little Silver, New Jersey. And she said, "Why am I reading about you in the New York Times and a lesbian-themed bondage club?" That was not fun.
Douglas.
Why are you reading the LA Times at all, man? You know, that's fat. So like, how does it get translated like that, Doug? Like, how does it go from one to the other? It's just, it goes through, is it just one mill that gets it and spins it? Or is it like gradually, like telephone, where it changes gradually across the country, or what?
Well, I mean, what happened was, look, we had a fundraiser and then there was an after party, apparently, that some donors did, right? And that's all pretty normal. The reality, though, was that they went to a place they shouldn't have. It wasn't a strip club. It was not a lesbian-themed bondage club. But that is what lives in lore. And that's what my friends at the DNC, Brad Woodhouse, was the DNC comms director at the time. He pumped that out. They found
North Carolina guy.
Yep, from Raleigh. And I will say, the spending was internally leaked, right? Like, so somebody at the RNC leaked it on ourselves, and the DNC saw it and pumped that out. And it became a 2-week story. And it was a complete disaster. And what I decided was, in classic sort of communications fashion, is I'm going to throw everyone under the bus except for my boss. And so I found every travel receipt that I could for Michael Steele, who was the RNC chair at the time. I found the flight number that he was on, what time it took off, what time it landed, approximated where in the air he would have been at that point. He was over Reno, Nevada. He couldn't have been at some club in Los Angeles. I threw the staffer under the bus in public. On television, I threatened to fire other people on television by name. And it actually, that sort of worked.
That is how you move up in Republican politics, ladies and gentlemen. That is how you do it.
Yeah, how did you deal with it? It was a bloodbath. People still don't work to this day. I also like the way you were like, they shouldn't have been there. It wasn't a lesbian-themed bondage club. It was way worse than that, and we were just happy when they called it that.
And I'll tell you, so that day, it was a Monday, and the RNC was going through a lot of tumult at that time. Michael Steele would say a lot of crazy things. I love him, but he will tell you he said a lot of crazy things. And I was able to procure a box at the, I think it was called the Verizon Center at the time, here, just a few blocks away. Bon Jovi was playing. That story breaks 8 a.m. on Monday. And my staff, so basically my door was closed all day as I was dealing with this. When Major comes out, he'll tell you some stories I probably don't remember about it. But I said to the staff the 2 or 3 times that I emerged from my office that day, like, you're going to the concert, you're gonna have a great time, I'm gonna be there. And basically I show up, it was a box, open bar, the staff is completely blotto. And I basically get there for Bon Jovi singing Runaway, and like 2 other songs, and the concert's over. That was my Monday of that day. And then it was the rest of the week. I had to talk about it on Megyn Kelly. And she was like, well, so here's a question I got. Is it frequent that you would send your staff to nudie bars? What do you do when Megyn Kelly says that to you on air? Obviously you say no, but not a fun week.
I think you say, God, thank you for asking about that. I was worried you would say about me being late to the Bon Jovi concert, which would embarrass me to everybody. That's awesome, man. So should we bring out our next guest here?
Let's do it.
Populate this stage.
Our next guest is the director of the Syracuse. I told her I wasn't going to mess this up. Director of the Syracuse University Institute for Democracy, Journalism, and it's one more thing she'll tell us when she gets out here. She's also a senior Axios contributor, Margaret Talev.
The other thing he said to Margaret was he recited her bio to her by heart, and somehow the note card got in the way.
He said, I'm going to forget the third word, which is weird because, of all the things, citizenship is what you excel in the most, right? You are really a civic participant.
I am a civic participant. Thank you for that. It is the Syracuse Institute of Democracy, Journalism, and Citizenship.
Yeah, pretty close.
Tell us about it.
Thank you, Bob.
You're welcome.
Our institute is based in Washington, D.C., and we look at how media and politics intersects, basically, how strong your democracy is, how media impacts politics, how politics impacts media, and how all of that impacts Americans or anyone's ability to engage in the process, trust the process. So How do you know what news you can trust? Do you even consume news, or are you just, doing whatever, entertainment stuff on your phone? Do you vote? Do you feel like your vote matters? The intersection of all those kind of things. So it's basically, we study and teach the daily chaos we're all living in every day now.
Right, yeah. So how's it going?
Yeah, it's going great. It's going really, I feel really good about the future. But, it's a pretty good segue into this conversation, because I think since the inception of humanity and the United States, there have always been periods of chaos and then periods of calm, periods we can all feel really proud of, and periods that have been really dark times in the history of this country. And through our resilience, our Constitution, the courts, and the First Amendment, we have always managed to pull through. So,
round of applause for those things.
Yeah.
Good gracious. Because we ask questions like, what's going on with democracy? Does my vote count? Am I actually watching news? And it's like, those are just the questions I ask when I look at the internet, Margaret.
Right?
Questions we're all asking ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bring out our third guest.
Let's bring out the third guest.
Well, Major, you've been in this town a long time.
Since 1990, for better or worse, yeah.
I bet you've seen some dirty business go down with congressmen.
Well, yeah. Well,
And that doesn't need to be.
I haven't seen
I'm
that
talking about
much.
lesbian bondage clubs. I'm just
I wasn't at
saying,
the club,
garden variety dirty
Maybe you've
business.
been part of some dirty business with Congress.
Only on Sundays. Only on Sundays.
Yes.
But you were saying backstage that there was a time when the staffs would mingle, the congressmen would mingle.
Sure. Now, look, and I don't want to be overly nostalgic and say that there was a perfect time in American politics when there was this radiant harmony but there were understood collaborations that were during the work time when you worked on legislation together. It wasn't an act of betrayal to your party to work with somebody across the aisle. And staffers were much more collegial with one another, as were members of Congress. And right now, I would say the toxicity level is so high that congressional staffers, Senate and House, are actively discouraged within their offices from mixing with, at any level, other fellow staffers from another party. So it's not just member to member. These things radiate, and they come all the way down to the staff level. So if you're a new staffer and you're seen in the hallway talking to another staffer that you've just met, but they happen to work for somebody who's in the other party, you might very well get a talking to by your chief of staff or your legislative assistant or something. And that just means we're less aware of each other. Doug, I think will back me up on this. I always found in legislative politics that the most effective legislators not only knew what they wanted to do. That's easy. That's the easy part of politics. The harder part of legislative politics is, what does my opponent want? What can they do? What can't they do? And how much do I know what their limitations are? I've always found the most successful people in a legislative conversation know as much about that member's state or that member's congressional district as they do. They've taken the time to learn, so they know how much elasticity they have. They don't ask them to do things they can't do, but they know enough about what they can do to have a conversation about why they can do it. And when you don't know the people you're trying to work things out with, you don't take that time, or you're regarded as some sort of turncoat if you do learn about your opponent. It makes all of this harder.
Yeah, that's true. And the staff, I think, really is an underreported part of that. And to some extent, they still work together. It's greatly reduced. And not that this is the definition of how you'd work together, but when I started in the House, the Senate's a bit of a different bird. When Friday would come in a recess, offices in a hallway, and the hallway will have Republicans and Democrats just because that's where your offices are, we'd pool money together and we'd buy a keg. Or we'd fill up one of these huge gray plastic trash cans with ice and beer. And 4 o'clock on Friday, music would be playing, and Republican offices and Democratic offices would be, having a good time and letting their hair down.
And getting to know one another.
Playing right now.
Exactly. And look, would sometimes things get a little out of hand? Yes. But it's one of the reasons I think cell phones and cameras have really ruined a lot of our politics, because now you see staffers following members of Congress outside trackers, and they're asking questions. They're intentionally not being polite. They're trying to elicit a reaction. I used to go to happy hours 2 or 3 times a summer on the speaker's balcony, and that was regardless of whether the speaker was a Republican or a Democrat. You can't do that anymore, and it in part is because constituents don't want to see members of Congress and staff having a good time on the speaker's balcony. Not that you're shotgunning beers or whatever, but it's a bad look. And if somebody takes a picture, you got a problem.
So Congress used to be less divisive and a lot more awesome, is what you're saying.
100%.
But I think that the media is actually a part of this conversation. And I don't just mean news reporters, but we can talk about that too. But what you're talking about, someone, a staffer rocking around running video on their phone that could get cut into an ad that could be posted on social media or stuck on Twitter. That's all the media also. And I think I met Doug covering the Hill. That was a long time ago. Major and I covered the White House together. So in the 20 or so, maybe longer for you, years that we've all been doing this, one of the biggest things that has changed is how the public consumes media. And an outlet like CBS, the network news, that is still kind of a neutral space. It is a place where people who lean left and people who lean right and people who lean in the middle, who sit in the middle, that's what the audience is. But the cables are super divided. News organizations, people who consume newspapers lean one way, people who consume different social media, it's all very fractured. And the way you decide whether something's a scandal or not, or whether something's the truth or a lie, that has so much to do with the information that you're taking in and also with the information that you're not taking in. I think about, as I was preparing for this, I was like, what are the craziest scandals I covered or the most impactful scandals that I covered in my years as a reporter? And I just think that the public gets to decide what a scandal is, whether it's like sex or corruption or a lie or, the cover-up that's worse than the crime. What's the bar for holy crap scandal? Well, it's whatever the public says it is. And when the public is not consuming the same information and cannot agree on what information to trust, it really changes the nature of what kind of scandals people can get away with and what kind of scandals bury someone, even if they're not necessarily that big a deal.
Right, and the hyper-partisan atmosphere creates, well, that's not a scandal because it's my side, but it's a scandal if it's your side. And there's this mechanism by which you can compare and contrast and still find yourself in a morally or ethically comfortable universe through your partisan lens. And there's plenty of either news or commentary sources that will reinforce you in that, will help you ride along that journey, which doesn't take you very far, but it does reinforce where you're already at.
So isn't it great that George Santos was able to bring Congress together?
That's what I was getting ready to say.
United.
How did we all come together to be like, well, that's not okay?
Well, I think this is a great time for you talking about the bygone era of Congress. Allow me to take us all on a journey to the bygone era of Congress. It's May 8th, 1856. Philemon T. Herbert, Democrat from California. Now, think Democrats think stronghold of the South. Him and a friend walk into the Willard Hotel. It's about 11 a.m., maybe 11:30. And they want to get some breakfast. Well, the young Irish waiter, who's an immigrant, informs Congressman Herbert and his friend that they stopped serving breakfast at 10:30. Herbert didn't like it. Now, Herbert, he was the congressman from California, but he was from Alabama. And being from Alabama, he considered himself a good Southern gentleman. He also had a reputation for being a card shark, frequenting brothels, and he attacked his California political rival with a knife. One San Francisco newspaper said of Herbert that he was a gambler who went into politics to better his position. So when the young Irish immigrant waiter tells Mr. Herbert that I'm sorry, sir, it's too late for breakfast, he says, "Clear out, you goddamn son of a bitch Irishman. Get me my breakfast now." So the waiter goes back to talk to the French chef and see if they can make an exception for the congressman. Now, the head waiter on duty was also an Irish immigrant. He was about 35 years old, about 200 pounds. His name was Thomas Keating. He witnessed the whole thing. And like any senior staffer at a restaurant, he goes up to the table and, "Gentlemen, just make sure everything's okay. Is everything okay here, gentlemen?" And Herbert didn't appreciate him either. He said, And you too, you goddamn Irishman, clear out. Get me my damn breakfast. Well, Keating starts walking away, and he mumbles something under his breath, and no one really could kind of hear. It has not been recorded exactly what he said, but Herbert heard what he said, and he didn't appreciate it. And either he took the butt of a pistol or it was his fist. There's conflicting accounts depending on the newspapers. But he punched Keating in the back of the neck. Keating wheeled around, grabbed a plate off of another table. He's about to throw it at the congressman. The congressman throws a chair at him. He dodges it. He throws the plate at the congressman. The congressman dodges that, and then they just lock. They're wrestling. Now, Keating's brother is working in the kitchen, Patrick Keating. He's a steward. He hears the sound of the melee. He runs out on the dining room floor. He sees the congressman pointing a gun at his brother. He goes and grabs the congressman's arm. They're wrestling for the gun. The congressman's friend tackles Patrick Keating, and then several waiters jumped on top of the congressman. Congressman gets free. He grabs Thomas Keating's collar with his left hand, with the right hand, puts the gun under his chest, pulls the trigger. Thomas Keating grabs his chest, calls for a priest, hits the ground and dies, breathes his last. The congressman calmly walks out the side door onto 14th Street, gets in a hack, which is a cab, goes down to the police station, turns himself in, claims self-defense. He sits in jail for 2 days as the judges try to figure out what do we do with this guy. In the meantime, in Congress, of course, this is like a big sensation. A bunch of congressmen show up and senators and people from D.C., they all show up at the police station in the door jam, and they're looking through the window. They're trying to figure out what's going to happen next. Well, meanwhile, down at the Capitol, a Republican congressman from Maine with the last name of Knowlton, he gets up and makes a speech. He offers a resolution in Congress asking for the Judiciary Committee to investigate exactly what happened and possibly expel the congressman. That resolution failed 79-70. It failed on the votes of Democrats, Mr. Herbert's own party, because they were worried that 1856 was an election year. And it was not uncommon, or it was not out of the realm of possibility that an election at that time could be thrown to the House. In fact, you had three major candidates in 1856. You had Buchanan, who was the Democratic candidate, James Buchanan. You had John C. Fremont, who was the first Republican nominee. And you had former President Millard Fillmore, who was on the know-nothing ticket. Now, it was the know-nothing votes combined with the Democratic votes that killed the resolution for the Judiciary Committee to investigate this incident, this murder. The know-nothings were the Nativist Party, meaning they hated immigrants. That was the galvanizing factor of this party. And between 1852 and 1854, they had their heyday. They took a few state legislatures, like they had Massachusetts, they had Pennsylvania, they had a few governors, they had the Speaker of the House for a time. They had several seats in Congress. They were a block to be reckoned with. And so it was on this, and the immigrant to hate in 1856 were the Irish, the dirty Irish. So the judge finally decides that Congressman Herbert will stand trial. And he posts he sets a $10,000 bond for his release. Immediately, two friends of the congressman pay the bond, and the congressman is released pending his trial. Well, that night, the congressman, his two buddies who paid his bail, and the attorney general for Washington, D.C., the man who was going to prosecute the case against the congressman, they go to dinner. And the attorney general for the Washington, D.C. was Jeanine Pirro at the time. Actually, it was a guy named Philip Barton Key. Now, Philip Barton Key, thank you, Ben. I'm not used to doing the clicker thing. Philip Barton Key was the son of Francis Scott Key, who wrote Star Spangled Banner.
He wrote the words to it, that it was set to an old English drinking song, and it became our song anyway.
That's how all songs work. So he's also the nephew of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Roger Taney. Now, this is May of 1856. Let's ask ourselves, is this an aberration? This murderer, a congressman murdering a waiter, an immigrant waiter? Is this an aberration or is this a trend? Well, 2 weeks after Herbert murders the Irish waiter across the street here at the Willard, Charles Sumner, who's a senator from Massachusetts, is caned while sitting at his desk by a Democratic congressman named Preston Brooks. Caned to within an inch of his life. So these were some crazy times.
They were some crazy times.
So a month later, Herbert goes on trial. The first trial is a hung jury. Second trial, there's 11 know-nothings on the jury. Herbert is acquitted. 3 years later, Herbert goes back to California. He's from San Francisco, and he's actually persona non grata. He goes back to San Francisco, and Californians don't want to have anything to. There were real his constituents were not into their congressman murdering waiters. They could put up with a lot in California.
San Francisco liberals, I tell you.
San Francisco liberals, that's right. So what would a man born in Alabama
Who hates
became
immigrants.
not you? We'll get back to you in a second. Came to ill repute in D.C. as a congressman. Where do you go from there? Where do you go? Yes. Texas. So Herbert goes down to Texas. When the Civil War breaks out, he raises a militia, and he dies in the Civil War. That's what happens to him. Now, our Attorney General, what happens to our Attorney General? Yes, in 1859, Attorney General Philip Barton Key is murdered by a New York congressman named Daniel Sickles in broad daylight in Lafayette Square Park. Key was having an affair with Sickles' wife. And Sickles killed him in broad daylight. There were many witnesses and pled temporary insanity. And he was acquitted.
So there was justice.
So that's, some congressman behaving badly.
That's like 10% of Sickles' story. This guy deserves a mini-series.
No doubt.
That's your next book.
It's true. To Sickles, there's a whole story to Sickles, but I have to yield my time.
So have you guys ever covered anything like that before?
I haven't. I brought notes, okay, because I was trying to pick my favorite scandal that I covered, and they all seemed like, I don't even know if anyone would write the story now. Can I be honest with you? Like, when I was covering the Bush administration, and there was a sort of mini scandal over U.S. attorneys and a bunch of U.S. attorneys getting fired so they could bring in some new U.S. attorneys who the Bush administration wanted to elevate, and it became like a whole investigation.
So look, that's something that is happening today.
No, this was like, I don't even know if it'd be a headline today. And this is what I was saying, like, I think it really does the context of the time you're in and how the electorate feels and how the political base of the place where the scandal or controversy is really matters. Anyway, so I just got bored with all the stuff that I covered. So I wanted to, and I think about this a different way, which is all of the political scandals before I became a reporter in Washington that helped define how I understood the capacity of politics. So I was born in June of 1972, about a week before the break-in at Democratic National Headquarters. Okay, so that was my first one.
You were a break-in baby.
I'm a Watergate baby. The year I graduated from high school was 1990. So
You hired Major Garrett in D.C.
exactly. Major was already working. The entire time I was attending high school, the Iran-Contra affair was playing out.
Yes.
About a month after I graduated, Ollie North's convictions were vacated. 1992, my stepdaughter Maggie was born, same year as Jennifer Flowers, among other things. 1994, the year I graduated from college, the Whitewater probe was launched, and other things happened. Oh yeah, sorry, Paula Jones. Okay, this is a big year. My daughter Abby, who's with us tonight in the audience, was born in 2003. Well, it was the same year that Arnold Schwarzenegger was elected governor in the California recall, which is what I was actually pregnant with Abby while covering the recall campaign. Not a scandal, although there was a scandal that was part of the campaign, but it's kind of went away. And 2003, the same year that Valerie Plame was outed as a covert CIA officer. You guys remember that? Then in 2005, I moved back to D.C. to cover Congress. And that was the same year as the Jack Abramoff scandal. Does anyone in the audience remember?
That was a big in gaming.
Why am I mentioning this? This was the investigation that involved a lobbyist, several lobbyists, and sort of the whole specter of taking advantage of Native American tribes that were trying to get into gaming. Because one of the lobbyists wrapped up in that case was a kid I partied with in high school. So, and I'll just leave you with this thought. How many of you all in this audience are either from DC or have lived in DC for quite a while? Okay, it's like a lot of townies. Okay, awesome. Yeah. So many of you have already done some of the famous sites of DC, like the Exorcist steps or whatever, right?
That's the one you mentioned?
Well, that's not the scandal. That's not just
There's the Jefferson Memorial and the Exorcist steps.
But you can actually do a whole like hotel scandal trail. You can do like drinks, like one drink per hotel kind of situation, and actually get kind of hammered if you do it.
It's like a ghost walk.
Follow Margaret when she leaves at the end of the show.
Right, exactly. So you can start at the Watergate, which has been redone, and you can go there and have a drink. Marion Barry, 1990. Formerly known as the Vista Hotel.
I walked by his statue today, and I'm thinking, wow. I mean, you do all of what you're about to tell us he
things.
did. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, Marion Barry, I don't mean to reduce a man to one quote. Bitch, set me up. But it's because there really was a lot more to the career, and he was, for all of his many faults, he also was at times in Washington history. He was a civil rights leader. He was a political figure to be reckoned with. Like, he was a major dude, but very troubled also. You guys will recall there was basically a FBI sting. He was videotaped smoking crack. This happened at a place that was called the Vista, but it's now the Westin on M Street, so you can stop there on your Washington tour. The Mayflower Hotel, storied Mayflower Hotel.
I've stayed there before. What's the story when that?
So has Elliot Spitzer.
What did you do there?
And so, right, exactly. Well, the Mayflower
Not
Bar.
enough, apparently.
The Mayflower Bar, no, I'm probably, and if you do, you shouldn't tell anyone. The Mayflower Bar is a few blocks walk from the White House. So a lot of reporters in DC would like to go to the Mayflower Bar, but that's not why it's famous. Among other people who have made it famous was Elliot Spitzer, the former governor of New York, whose political ambitions were ruined after a very ill-fated, major encounter at the Mayflower. There's also the Ritz-Carlton in Pentagon City, if you want to cross the river. I don't even know if he was inside the Ritz-Carlton or just like in the parking lot, but a famous bribery case unfolded there. And then the Jefferson, which is my favorite hotel bar in Washington. Dick Morris also spent quite a bit of time.
Toes, ladies and gentlemen, look it up.
Yes, Google it, exactly. Anyway, so that's it.
So Major,
I offer you the hotel
nice walk
tour
down
of
memory lane.
Major, Doug, I don't know if it was before you, but Major, what was it like to have a mayor who was smoking crack?
The biggest problem with Mayor Barry was not that he smoked crack. He never moved the snow off the street. That was the biggest problem. Anyone who can remember the Marion Barry,
He tried his
never
best.
plowed the streets. Wait, days and days and days. Yeah, that was, look, if he'd plowed the streets, I wouldn't have cared, man.
Should have been able to with all that energy, you know what I'm saying?
It did not transfer. Very limited.
Marion Barry, one time when there was a massive snowstorm, arrives back at DCA, I think on a private jet, from being in the Bahamas or somewhere like that, and a reporter is there waiting for him and asks him, shouldn't you be here doing your job? And he said, F you, I'm going home. Now, how can you not love somebody like that?
Let's build him a statue.
That's constituent service at its finest, ladies and gentlemen.
And to Margaret's point, all of the things that she mentioned were major stories that went on for days or weeks or in some cases months. And we sort of like, oh, I forgot about.
They brought down a presidency. They destroyed people's careers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not in every case. In
No.
some cases, people got elected president twice. But, these were epic scandals.
Yeah, do you know how much harder the lecture on Watergate has gotten in the last couple of years? Like, I'm going to go back to the fall and teach, and I don't even know how to surprise people anymore. I'm like, and then he used the CIA to shut down the FBI. And they're going to be like, which one was that? Is that?
Right.
And I'm going to be like, that used to be surprising to people. And now they're like, and no one after that did it. It took like a couple before they figured out they could do it. You can't teach about, Warren G. Harding anymore. You're like, yeah, he just hired all of his friends and they all broke the law. And people are going to be like, that's what they do. Like, that's... It's hard to teach now.
Let's go back to Warren G. Harding for a second.
No. Oh, okay. I thought you meant like go back to his presidency. I was like, I'm good.
But go back to, because he was the scandal. For years, things were compared to Teapot Dome.
Yeah, Teapot Dome, that's the one. Not his mistress that he had and the multiple letters he sent to her addressed from Mount Jerry, which was what he used to describe his penis. He sent Christmas cards from Jerry.
How can you not love a guy like that?
And there are many schools named after Warren G. Harding. There are.
There are, and many parents who have not looked him up is what I think. He's trouble.
Can you imagine if they had like reels at the time, instead of just postcards?
Oh, that's true. Oh my God.
Thanks for that.
Reels and Tinder.
Somebody take the TikTok at Mount Jerry and go ahead and hold on to it so nobody uses it, please.
Look, this is we talk about like the media. The media is the message, right?
Oh, yeah.
With Marshall McLuhan.
Marshall McLuhan, yeah.
But would Nixon have had to resign if the media landscape was like it is today?
Hard to know. I think the more important observation is that when Donald Trump looks at Richard Nixon, he said he never should have resigned. He should not have felt shame. He should have just told everyone, screw you, and I'm staying. I think he learned part of that lesson through the resiliency of Bill Clinton, knocking down scandal after scandal after scandal and saying, I'm not leaving. You're not going to defeat me. I'll rally my troops. Trump learned that from a couple of people who participated in American politics long before he got involved. One was Richard Nixon, who I believe he concluded blew it, should have stayed, and Bill Clinton, who did not say, you're going to drive me out. He said, no, I will drive you back. And Trump looked at that and said, that's my model.
But let's just say this is what should be fair about it is, I don't think that Trump could do what he does now if it weren't for the absolute lack of faith that people came away with from both Johnson lying and then Nixon lying.
Well, sure. I really do think that if you think about the continuum of American presidential politics post Nixon and Johnson, it is a series of outsiders, with one exception, George Herbert Walker Bush, who was an institutionalist. Everyone else, starting with Jimmy Carter all the way through Donald Trump, at one level or another, campaigned first and foremost as an outsider, even as a governor. Bill Clinton did that. Ronald Reagan did that. Certainly Jimmy Carter did it. Barack Obama quite obviously did it. George W. Bush in his own way did it. A little harder because he's a legacy kid, all that sort of stuff. And Donald Trump, most certainly. So I think in this parade of outsiders, neo-amateurs at the presidential level, the alpha is Jimmy Carter, the omega is Donald Trump.
It's interesting because I remember when Major mentioned Clinton, I remember a conversation I had with Mike McCurry in 2015 where he would have told you, he said it publicly a lot, that there's no way that Bill Clinton, this is in the context of 2015, Trump's taking the escalator ride down, but that's about it. There's no way that Bill Clinton survives if the media environment was what it was with Twitter and all of that. I don't know if Mike still thinks that's true, given where we are now, that things have changed that much in 10 years.
I completely disagree with that because social media has created a ready army of antagonists or counter-antagonists to argue on your behalf, even when you're not arguing. Or you argue one thing and your antagonists or supporters, depending on your point of view, echo that, amplify that, and accelerate that.
If you can use it, but it has elevated the currency of the communicator as a political tool, right?
They're influencers.
Yeah,
right?
More and more. Yeah.
Congressmen, it seems like they're trying to be influencers.
And more, they're not interested in doing the
themselves.
job. Madison Cawthorn, if you remember him, who was around for a brief blip, made it actually very clear. He's like, I don't need legislative staff. That's not why I'm here. He's a legislator, or was a legislator. It's part of why he's not one anymore.
I only need communications people. That's all he hired.
Madison Cawthorn was like, I don't need staffers when I got all these sweet vids of me punching trees, which was a video he put out, if you don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
Doug, take us back, because you worked for a California congressman yourself. Yeah. And that was at a time there was a great scandal that involved another California congressman.
Yeah, so I worked for Richard Pombo, who was and this will tell you how much it's all changed. Richard Pombo was a rancher from Tracy, California, it's outside of Stockton. And in his official portrait, he wore a cowboy hat. I got him on national television twice in my multiple years of working for him as a press secretary. And both times I did, I could put my feet up on the desk because my job was done for the year. I got him on ABC News and on Fox News, done. Now, members of Congress are bookers, are your staff, they're bookers. It's why we all know who all these freshman members of Congress are, majority or minority. They haven't done anything yet. They're influencers, they're personalities. But Pombo was from Tracy, Stockton, Lodi was his district. The district below it, Modesto, was Gary Condit's. Now, Gary Condit got caught in this story this situation of, he was fooling around with an intern named Chandra Levy. And Chandra Levy was ultimately found dead in Rock Creek Park. Now, no one thinks that Gary Condit did it, but this became one of the driving stories both in Washington and nationally for weeks and weeks, in part because Condit didn't have good answers, wouldn't admit to the affair, which everybody assumed was true and was true. He did an interview with Connie Chung, I think it was, where to every question, he would say, well, I'm not a perfect person. And his wife was sitting next to him, of course. And I knew his wife, his son, and his daughter, because our offices worked very closely together. Condit was a Democrat. Pombo was a Republican. On Inauguration Day of 2001, we did a joint event together. They did joint fundraisers together. And Gary Condit was a really good member of Congress. And he, unfortunately for him, had to be so unlucky that the intern he was fooling around with got murdered, which is why his career got derailed. And, obviously what happened to Chandra Levy was a disaster, or was a tragedy. But we were one office away, meaning geographically. So we were also going through California redistricting at the time. And so I remember very clearly, redistricting gets talked about a lot, but not live on cable news. And I remember when we were getting sort of our lines being redrawn, Kate Snow, who's now with NBC, was with CNN at the time, and I would call her while she was on air with, okay, they've taken this part of Stockton out of our district, which means that's the new district, and they're upping the number of African Americans and Hispanics in Condit's district to make it a safer district. Now, Condit ultimately had to retire, but part of the redistricting to go straight in like an arm that went into Stockton was to pull more Democratic votes in to save Condit if he were to survive. And it's still a Democratic district 2 redistrictings later.
I remember that so well, that scandal, because that was the story before 9/11.
Before 9/11, man. That was the
that
summer
and the
story.
Summer of the Shark.
Summer of the Shark.
Yep.
Those were the 2 things we were obsessed with as a country, at least on cable.
And
9/11, and we all got a...
And Congressman
Very
Condit,
rude awakening.
until they found the true murderer of Chandra Levy, he was the suspect, at least in the public's...
In the public eye.
In the public eye.
He was definitely a person of interest. We could not take their eyes off him.
That's right.
And his answers were bad, as Doug said. His answers were evasive in a way that they didn't need to be, and that evasiveness led to a aggregated sense of suspicion that he couldn't shake.
Like, what really strikes me as we're talking about all this, the kind of things that you think of when you're doing a show talking about scandals in politics, is that we really are talking about, like, sex or some kind of corruption that's like, I don't know, like cheesy and like pay to play stuff, right? But the stuff that really should be a scandal is the stuff that is the stuff that's legal or might be legal, depending on how the court rules. And it's the stuff that it's the stuff that like profoundly impacts, tens or hundreds of millions of people. And I'm not saying the other stuff isn't important too. It's like really important to hold people accountable when they betray the public trust. But the scandals that get remembered as scandals tend to be ones for which there was a cover-up or an awkward answer where everyone's trying to pretend it didn't happen, or something where the wife would be mad, or whatever. And some of the other stuff just happens in broad daylight with the votes of one or both parties, and it's more scandalous than any of it.
Members of Congress can still legally trade stocks, and they have information that is important or relevant to the future of that stock. Happens all the time.
But wasn't it, is it Lanny Davis who worked with Clinton, who said, tell it early, tell it all, and tell it yourself?
Yeah. As a way to get ahead of whatever.
If you're in trouble, tell it early,
story.
Tell it all, and tell it yourself.
Right.
And that
sort of
seems to be what
hermetically
so many
seal
don't
that narrative, so it doesn't leak any water. Yeah.
But I don't know if that applies anymore. I mean, Donald Trump has certainly shown, to your point earlier, Ben, the way he communicates, he doesn't follow any of the rules. And so your students are answering that question post Donald Trump. So whether they like him or they don't like him, their opinion of how you deal with this or what happens in politics has changed. Yeah. They all do it. And that Trump does it in broad daylight is what makes it even harder to attack.
Wasn't that what he said recently, or one of the people supporting him recently said, was the problem with the other people was that they tried to hide it? And that Trump's doing it out in the open, so that's fine.
So it must be okay. Yeah. He's not ashamed of it, so it must be okay. And that lack of shame, that sort of internal compass that says, what are you going to do about it?
Well, but
I'm good with it.
There's also
you should be good with it.
Mechanism called elections, and when the elections validate a politician's behavior, it's
they rightly fall back on that and say, hey, everyone saw it, I won.
Yeah, and
what are you going to do about it?
And by the way, Donald Trump is not a lame duck president. He's a YOLO president, right? He's not going to be president in 6 years or anything like that. This is it. So he's going to take the plane and say thank you very much, and maybe I'll give you something back. Maybe I won't. I'll decide later, and do whatever he wants.
A YOLO president is the best I've ever heard anybody describe what it is. Because he's back and he's not coming back.
Right.
Even he's been probably not a third term, and that's saying something.
Oh, and he'll joke about a third term, but realistically,
it sells T-shirts and hats.
Yeah, and it drives people crazy. It drives the people he wants to drive crazy. So, and by the way, to talk a little music. So if Bruce Springsteen, whom I love and have seen 50 times in concert, gives a speech railing on Donald Trump, Trump loves that. He wants to fight with Bruce Springsteen, especially if it distracts from the news that, I don't know, our credit got downgraded. So what are we going to talk about? A credit downgrading or Bruce Springsteen?
All right, so here's a question, because we draw these dividing lines, right? And Major, you covered, you moved here in 1990, you've been working in the media, right? And we got to something earlier, which is 9/11. And I think we've forgotten this kind of weird moment in the 1990s where the Cold War came to an end. And that was like the whole purpose of everything, right? Was we were fighting communism, and then the Soviet Union collapses, and the wall falls and all of this. And suddenly
every music video was based on the United States Soviet competition, right?
Yeah. No kidding. Iron Eagle. We don't need to get into them. But it's like suddenly this cultural and political moment had ended. Right. And then we know 9/11 reorients us. So I wonder, in that period between where there was this weird 1990s where it was where are we going? Did you see the way that we covered scandal in that moment and the things that were everybody focused on then and that got more attention? Was that moment particular in that sense, or does it just or is there kind of something consistent that threads through all these years?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if our sensitivity or awareness to scandal became more acute after the end of the Cold War. It might have, because people would have assumed, well, the risks are less if we dislodge someone who's in a position of power because we don't have to worry about nuclear Armageddon, and we want smart people to stay in Congress, even if they do things that we might find ourselves scandalized by. I'm not sure about that. I'll leave that to everyone else's frame of reference. What I will say, though, is I watched as I arrived in Washington in 1990 repetitive efforts within Congress to make itself appear more ethical. So when I first arrived in Congress, Jim Wright had just been ejected as Speaker of the House. Why? Because he wrote a book, or had a staffer write a book, and then had that book published, and then had industry groups buy the book to make it a bestseller, and he got all the profits from the selling of that book, and also through speeches about the book, for which he was paid honoraria, as many other members of Congress were. So this was sort of a back-sided way to make a lot of money from people who had business before government, but not get it directly, not have a safe in your office, which until the late 70s, every member of the House did. Had a safe in their office. Safe
for what? For what?
For cash drops. For cash drops in the safes. That's what they were for. So it wasn't happening that directly. It was happening in a kind of indirect way. But this became such a cause celeb in part because of someone not very well known at the time named Newt Gingrich, who brought this all to attention and hammered it aggressively
because
wherever he could.
He was a leader in ethical standards.
Yeah, well, as we found out later, he wasn't as much, but he made it a very big deal. Hammered it on the Wall Street Journal, went on every television station, talked to every reporter, buttonholed everyone he could, and created it. And Jim Wright had left. So then there was a reassessment of that. If you might remember, this is really going back into the early 90s, the House check scandal, where the members of the House could write a check on funds that really didn't exist and use them for things in their personal life or their political life. And some people bounced checks and some people didn't. And some people who were like fiscal conservatives and always talking about balancing this and balancing that, well, it turns out they bounced a lot of checks. It wasn't a technical bouncing, but it certainly looked like it. The bank was incredibly forgiving about it. Well, that was kind of a mini scandal. So they corrected that. They stopped the free use of mail, franked mail, to get out your political message as masquerading as a newsletter. They did all these things to make themselves appear more ethical, with better political morality. And as they took every single one of those steps, the sense that Congress was an ethical place declined every single time. Every remedial effort was met by the public, not with a shrug, but like, no, that's confirmation. You guys are probably figured something else out that you're not telling me about, but you've admitted that thing, so I'm going to hold you responsible for that thing you're fixing, assuming now you're more corrupt than I even imagined.
Cynicism.
So it didn't work.
Cynicism.
It got very much deeper throughout that period of time.
Well, the timing of it, though, also, remember, tracked with the creation of cable news and 24/7 cable news. And I think less than the end of the Soviet Union, it was the aftermath of Watergate that drove so much of the throw the bums out and gave birth to investigative journalism, to sort of modern, late 20th century investigative journalism, which ended up being about covering corruption or covering politicians as people who would inevitably corrupt and be corrupted. And if you look now at people's appetite for that kind of reporting, you can actually measure it. There's a decline in the public's interest in that kind of news. It was so important after Richard Nixon, and it has sort of ebbed, and people are like, I'll just take the podcast that's sort of politics adjacent. It's already baked in, the idea. I mean, you've watched the trust numbers plummet since that year, since 1972. Nobody trusts anything, not politicians, not the media, not the Supreme Court, labor unions, kind of, small business, kind of,
the church,
Congress.
the NFL, everything.
Yes, everything's down. Exactly.
And to go back when you mentioned about outsiders and the end of the Cold War and all that. So one of the things that led to the outsider phenomenon was understood national dissatisfaction with two really smart institutionalists, Richard Nixon and Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson dramatically intensified the Vietnam War, and then lied to the country not in a lying sort of way, but in a rosy scenario, everything is going great, progress sort of way, that became so fundamentally disconnected from the facts that it delegitimized his entire presidency, even though many other incredibly important things were accomplished. Then Richard Nixon comes along, again, a product of this system of Washington, institutional people, bipartisan people. And so this idea that accumulated sense of knowledge or tactical sense of how to turn the knobs, move the levers in Washington to get outcomes, get things done, became dramatically undervalued or devalued because the country looked at it and said, that accumulated knowledge did not meet our needs at all. And the idea that outsiders not tainted by Washington started and really sped forward dramatically with Jimmy Carter.
Who was the congressman who kept the money in the safe on ice?
William Jefferson.
Thank you.
Louisiana.
Yes, Louisiana.
Thank you.
In a refrigerator. It wasn't in a safe, it was in a refrigerator.
We're having this conversation, and these names are popping up. David Vitter, Mark Foley. I'm just like all these names. Packard.
Bob Packwood.
Bob Packwood. Who was the presidential candidate named Gary from Colorado?
Gary Hart.
Who said, "Follow me. You think I'm having an affair?
Mm-hmm.
Follow me." And the reporters did. And in fact, he was having an affair.
He was.
It didn't help that the boat that he was pictured on was called Monkey Business.
That's right.
But let me tell you, sort of operationally, since we're talking about scandal, I remember
that the only
working
one
in the
you got to
House the day that the Starr report was delivered. And Major, you'll remember that day very well.
Oh, yeah. Everyone with the footnotes.
So the Starr report gets delivered to every House office, every Senate office, and basically I think every office did the exact same thing that we did in our office in Rayburn. Okay, you get pages 1 through 20. You get 21 through 40. I'm going to take 41 through 60 and on down the line.
Yeah, it wasn't posted on the web in which you could word search it instantly. You actually had to read the bad boy.
Just like ChatGPT it now. You know everything in 30 seconds.
The Ken Starr report was written in 1932 by Robert E. Lee. That's the ChatGPT version.
So we had 5 staffers in a room all going through. Wait a second. Have you heard about the cigar?
Look it up.
This was going on constantly in every House office.
Were they like, we should take up a collection and get a keg while we do this?
We might have still done it that next Friday, and what did we talk about? That. Yeah. But that's how pre-internet, pre-real internet, that's how the Starr report was delivered. One office at a time, where everybody just had to divvy up pages.
And a key staffer for the Starr report, Brett Kavanaugh.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Well, we got to kind of keep on time here. I think,
yes, okay.
To wrap this up, maybe just give each of you guys 1 minute, to say like, you've covered this for a long time. Like, what's something you think that we could be doing better, right? Like we ourselves as Americans, right? Everybody's going, the media does this, but at the end of the day,
back to the citizens.
Yeah, it's the citizens. Like, what's something that a citizen could do to perhaps inoculate themselves from it, or perhaps be the person that creates the world that has the better, the more honorable officials. Start with Major.
So I won't take a minute. I'll just give you this one little piece of advice. People ask me all the time about news consumption. Where should I go? What should I believe? What should I read? And I can't give them an answer. I could give them the simplistic, self-aggrandizing answer. Oh, watch CBS. That'll solve everything. That's ridiculous. But all I would say is this, and then I'll hand it off to Margaret. When you think about your news consumption habits, if you wake up in the morning, and from the time you wake up, and you first look at your phone or your iPad or whatever, to the time you go to sleep at night, whatever news you've consumed, if that news consumption leaves you feeling verified, ratified, and calm, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong.
Yes.
News is meant to jar your sense of your own internal sensibilities, how you view the world, how the world looks and sounds to you. So there are so many sources that will leave you feeling ratified, verified, and calm. Mix that up a bit.
Same goes with history, guys. Margaret?
Thank you for that was great. Thank you.
You should watch CBS and you should listen and watch Major's programming. And you should subscribe to Axios newsletters. They're free. And to my IDJC newsletter, The Squeeze, it's also free. I'll give Bob and Ben a link. But that's not my advice, but please do all those things. I would say in an era now where we are also accustomed to information coming to us, it comes into your phone and everyone's a specialist, and you think, well, I'm not a specialist in tax policy or in Iranian nuclear stuff. I don't know. And so you might have a question and think, I wonder if that's true, or I wonder how that happens. And I guess my advice would be that you should feel empowered to go find the answer to questions that you have instead of waiting for someone else to tell you the answer. And this is one of the most basic things that I talk about with the undergraduates that I teach, because if you're 18 or 19 or 20, the only presidents you've ever been aware of in your life are Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And the only time in your life when you've ever been at an age where you would consume news is a time when it came into your phone and you didn't watch it traditionally and you didn't read it traditionally, and you probably get it on social media. And so again, you're programmed to think, I don't know, and whatever the news is whatever finds you. But the truth is that we're all holding supercomputers, and amid all the misinformation and junk and entertainment stuff that is masqueraded as news and all the opinion stuff and the stuff that's meant to divide you, there's also like totally verifiable, knowable facts that you can trust, that you can literally just type a couple keystrokes into your phone. And if you're still not sure if it's true, if you look 3 or 4 or 5 other places and it all says the same thing, it's probably true. And I guess my best advice is you should feel entitled and empowered and expected to find out answers to things you want to know.
Yeah, the first thing I would say is put the phone down or close the laptop more than you do. We are all besieged with information, which is why I hate the term low information voter. A low information voter is somebody that Washington, D.C. defines as somebody who didn't read that really smart think piece in The Atlantic. Nobody reads The Atlantic, let's be honest, right?
I read
All
The
respect to The
Atlantic.
Atlantic. But
Listen to narrated versions of Atlantic articles. You might hear some voice that you recognize.
no one in Kernersville, North Carolina reads The Atlantic, doesn't make them low information voters. Close your laptop, turn off the phone a little bit. The other is, sort of to Margaret's point, is try and find information not that confirms your belief, also to Major's point, but that can be verifiably reliable. Now that's hard to do, but look, when the internet was created, initially like, oh, we can do all these amazing things. We can buy sporting tickets to games without leaving our house and waiting in line. Fantastic. Now it's just this international database of pornography and disinformation. And that creates real problems. So if you can look for information that challenges your assumptions, I think that's the best thing you can do, and then turn it off.
There we go, ladies and gentlemen. Advice from people who have been in the game for quite a while.
Hey, real quick, I know we got to get to this amazing thing here. Ben and I, we thought about who are our friends here and who would we want to hang out with, have a beer, and hear stories from. And so, I think we picked the right people.
Yeah, you guys are awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
I want to hang out with Marion Barry and Daniel Sickles.
We tried to get in touch with Marion Barry, but he never got back to us. We will smoke crack after the show in his honor.
That's the only reason I showed up, man.
It was promised. Did you
We're
know
going to listen to Coltrane and...
if you go to a statue and you chip a little rock off, take it home. All right. Anyway. Thank you for listening to The Road to Now. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell the world by giving us 5 stars and a review on Apple Podcasts or 5 stars on Spotify. Or spread the word directly. Just text a friend maybe, or share a link on social media. Anything helps and we appreciate it. And if you've got a friend who hasn't gotten into podcasts yet, let them know they can hear us every weekend on SiriusXM's POTUS Channel 124. Now is the time when we say our special thanks to our supporters on Patreon and give a shout out to our Washingtonians. That list is Tanya Marsh, Mary Hawking, Tim and Caitlin Wells, Fig White, Matt Williams, Team Martin, Ann Williams and Frank Edwards, Nate Farrer, Jennifer and Magnolia, Chris and Teresa Adams, Joy Avery, Edward Carlson, and Aaron and Derek Garrison. Thanks to all you guys for supporting us. If you want to support our work and maybe get on that list, you can join us on Patreon at patreon.com/theroadtonow. You'll get extended versions of select conversations, extra episodes, bonus materials, and more. That's all available at patreon.com/theroadtonow. For more on the show, visit our website, theroadtonow.com, where you can easily search our back catalog and quickly find links to content. Why is it so good? 7 Ages Design. That's who made it. If you're looking for a website, go check them out. The Road to Now is hosted and produced by Bob Crawford and me, Ben Sawyer. Our associate producer is Gary Fletcher. This episode was edited by Gary Fletcher, and our theme music, like pretty much always, was by Paul DeFiglia. For Bob Crawford, this is Ben Sawyer. Thank you for listening. Take care.